Good evening. My name is Minta, and I'm here tonight to share a little bit about my adventures on the Appalachian Trail, because I believe there's something profound about leaving the clutter of life behind, grabbing a backpack with a few bare essentials, and taking a long walk in the woods. And it's in the beautiful simplicity of nature that I've realized what it means to be fully human. The Appalachian Trail, lovingly referred to as the AT, was finished in 1937 and is a footpath that stretches 2,180 miles between Springer Mountain in Georgia and Mount Katahdin in Maine. The entire journey is marked by 2x6-inch white blazes that are painted on trees and rocks along the way. And the AT passes through 14 states, and millions of people visit the trail each year. Many go on short day hikes, some go for a weekend of backpacking, while still others complete longer sections of the trail. Every year, between 1,800 and 2,000 people attempt to complete the entire length of the trail in one season. And these individuals earn the name through hikers. Only 1 in 4 successfully complete the journey. And I have dreamt of completing an Appalachian Trail through hike since I was 10 years old. And last summer, I got the chance to make a good chunk of that dream come true. On May 26, 2014, just 8 days after I graduated from high school, I set off with 2 of my best friends, Emily, Natalie, and Emily's dad, Mr. Barry, in the family Suburban as we made the journey all the way from Knoxville, Tennessee, where I live, to Massachusetts. And when we got to the trail, it was time to leave behind just about everything that was familiar and comfortable and go for a long walk in the woods. So our adventure by the statistics is as follows. Over the course of 40 days, we hiked 422.1 miles in 4 states: Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. All in all, I saw 3 snakes, 2 bears, 1 porcupine, 100 plus really aggressive red squirrels, and several thousand mosquitoes and black flies. As we walked over slippery rocks and roots, streams, bogs, you name it, I fell a grand total of 21 times and actually lost count of the blisters by the end of 400 miles. So as you might imagine, the adventures, highs, lows of long-distance hiking are almost never-ending. So tonight I hope to share some of my adventures and answer some of those big trail curiosities like, where do you sleep? What do you eat? Like, what do you do all day when you're on the Appalachian Trail? But also relate trail life to life at Vanderbilt, because I think the two definitely go together. The trail's a lot more than walking. So our journey begins in a small town called Lee, Massachusetts. It's in southern Massachusetts. And to be completely honest, the first day of hiking was about the most humid and most buggy of the entire summer. So I definitely was thinking to myself, Minta, what the heck have you gotten yourself into? But it's okay, it got better after that. So what does a typical day on the trail look like? Well, hikers wake up with the sun. So in New England in the summer, that was anywhere between 4:30 and 5:30 in the morning. And from there, we would take about an hour to pack up all of our camping equipment into a backpack, cram a few Pop-Tarts, and plan our mileage for the day. Every day, we'd hike anywhere between 12 and 20 miles, just depending on trail conditions, weather, how fresh our legs were feeling, just a lot of different factors. And most of the time during the day, just because we had different speeds, we would hike by ourselves, which was actually a really neat experience to just do a lot of thinking. And everybody has their own rhythm. Mine tended to be hike 4 or 5 miles, 2 hours, and then take a break for a snack, a nap if I could find a sunny spot, and keep going. Emily, my friend here in the other blue shirt, tended to just kind of power right on through and get to camp really early and then wait on us all. So once we got to camp in the evening, we'd reconvene to cook for about an hour. The green crocodile, his name is Kyle the crocodile. We bought him in the Kroger on our last night before we left, and he became our trail mascot. So we carried him the whole way. Sometimes he got neglected at the end. That was really sad. So every night we would cook for about an hour, kind of unwind, relax, enjoy the other hikers at our campsite, and then we were usually in bed like at or before 8 o'clock, because after you hike all day, all you want to do is rest. So Massachusetts came and went. So you might be wondering, like, what's in the blue backpack? So when you're going to be hiking hundreds of miles, there's nothing worse than carrying even an ounce more than you need to, but there's also nothing worse than not having what you really do need. So the basics for a backpacker include a lightweight down sleeping bag, a foam ground pad, Shelter, in our case, this was a large piece of siliconized nylon that we used as a tarp, high-calorie food, a small canister stove about this big, some basic first aid and personal hygiene items, a guidebook, a beloved pair of Crocs, and not much else. So as we kept on going up into Vermont, we did earn eventually our trail names. The Appalachian Trail is an experience with solitude, but there's also an incredibly vibrant and supportive community of hikers along the way. So in this community, people seldom go by their actual names. They go by their trail names, which are not chosen, they are given. And mine became Blueberry because of my completely unplanned but highly coordinated blue hat, blue pack, and blue shirt that I wore all summer. My friend Emily in the other blue shirt became Double Dip after she fell in 2 streams in one day. Our friend Natalie here actually was called Bear Bait because she unfortunately injured her knee just a few days into the trip and had to go home to let it heal and go back to her summer job. But when she was still with us, she was a little slower, so she did become Bear Bait. She was okay with it. Natalie's awesome. Then our fearless leader, Mr. Barry, went by Shabbat, which is Hebrew for Sabbath, because he took 2 months off from work to walk with us. So like I said, we moved into Vermont, which is where the Appalachian Trail actually merges with another famous long-distance trail called the Long Trail. It's kind of a rite of passage in Vermont. It goes from the southern border up to the Canadian border. So this is the sign that marks where the Appalachian Trail merges with the Long Trail. So where do you sleep when you've hiked all day and there's no civilization for miles? Well, thankfully, an army of volunteers has built around 250 wooden, what we call trail shelters. So they're usually 3-sided shelters with wooden bunks or sometimes just a floor where people will line up their sleeping bags. They not only provide a warm place to sleep, but also they're like this social gathering place for the Appalachian Trail community. And more nice than not, we would settle down on the wooden bunks amongst complete strangers and know their entire life story by the morning. Because on the Appalachian Trail, there's something really unique about it. Everybody's walking, nobody's taking a shower, so everybody stinks. So there's really absolutely no reason to be anything but exactly who you are. And it's a beautiful thing. That's why I say I learned to be fully human on the Appalachian Trail. So this is Killington Peak. This is just a cool picture I wanted to share. This is actually a ski resort in Vermont and New Hampshire. We hiked over several of these, or we'd go by the lifts, and we were always hoping that one of them would lead to a magical restaurant, and it never happened. But we did end up going to resupply our food. There's no way I was going to carry 40 days of food, nor would anyone else. And thankfully, the Appalachian Trail crosses roads and highways that lead to what we call trail towns every 4 to 6 days or so. So when it was time to resupply our food, how might we get there? Hikers' favorite way of transportation is hitchhiking, which I did with regularity over the summer. Would not do it in Nashville, but the trail community is very accustomed to it, and it's actually great fun, as Mr. Barry would strategically stand out of sight and let the girls get the ride, because we had quite an easier time at doing that. And this was so much fun. We met the coolest characters. This is Carl. He's one of our friends that took us straight to a farmer's market in Bennington, Vermont, that we would have never found by ourselves. So we just got to meet a lot of neat people. We met a World War II veteran, a semi-truck driver, just all sorts of characters. So once in town, we would raid the local grocery store for our next batch of trail food, which included Pop-Tarts for breakfast, trail mix, cheese, peanut butter, bread, that kind of thing for lunch, and then prepackaged rice and pasta meals for dinner. But when in town, there's no way we were eating that when there was ice cream available. So I think we averaged probably about 5 meals a day when we were in town, because a hiker will burn anywhere between 4,000 and 6,000 calories in a single day of hiking. So we would absolutely go for it in town. And sometimes we would take what hikers call a 0 day, which is where you stay in town all day, do your laundry, get a shower, and just enjoy a day to rest your legs. And so our accommodations for these kind of things were either a really cheap motel, or my personal favorite was the hiker hostel, which is usually someone's converted garage where they've built some bunks and charge people per night for shower, bunk, laundry, and a great conversation is always in order. So as we left Vermont, we entered into New Hampshire. This is actually in Hanover, New Hampshire, where Dartmouth is. So the Appalachian Trail actually goes across the campus of an Ivy League university. So we were there on commencement weekend, too. All the parents were like, "What are you doing?" So we entered New Hampshire, which is known amongst the hiking community as one of the hardest states to hike on the entire trail. The trail basically turns into a mess of boulders, streams, all sorts of things that you have to pick your way across. And we went from hiking 17, 18, 20 miles in a day at this point to averaging just around 12, just because it took so long. So this might bring up the question of safety. And personally, I feel just as secure on the Appalachian Trail as I do walking across Vanderbilt campus at night, if not more, just like personal safety-wise. But we did have some exciting encounters with the elements, especially in the White Mountains, which are famous for some of the most brutal and unpredictable weather in the eastern United States. So some of those stories would include getting caught in one of these famous unpredictable thunderstorms on a ridge line where the lightning was close enough to make the hair on my arm stand up. So that was definitely scary. And then also around the 4th of July, I don't know if you remember Hurricane Arthur making landfall, but I certainly do, because we were above tree line when that happened, completely exposed on a mountain ridge. And while this brought a lot of rain at lower elevations, we dealt with 70-mile-per-hour winds that were strong enough to knock me over on multiple occasions. So here's a little sample of that morning. It was quite fun. So basically, this was a morning where, we got knocked down into all sorts of rock cairns. I mean, people lost their hats, people lost their pack covers. It was quite fun. But another interesting thing about the mountains in New Hampshire is the opportunity to stay in huts. And the trail club that maintains the New Hampshire section of trail has built 8 sustainable structures along the trail that guests hike to, and you can pay $100 per person per night for a bunk, hot dinner, and hot breakfast, which is great, but there's no way we're paying $100 for that. So thankfully, for long-distance hikers, there's a privilege called Work for Stay that we took advantage of, which basically means if you get there early enough and are nice to the crew at the cabins, they will let you sleep on the kitchen floor and finish off the leftovers in exchange for a couple hours of washing dishes, telling stories to the guests, sweeping, that sort of thing. So it was definitely a deal for us. We loved it. So the last state on our journey was what many consider to be their favorite on the entire trail. Would be Maine. Maine is incredibly rugged. The clear, rushing water we'd been drinking for well over 300 miles in Maine turned into a lot of what we would call it Texas tea. It was like brown pond scum, essentially. So I filtered every drop of it and then also used chemical treatment. So I did not get Giardia. Some of my fellow hikers were not so lucky. But murky water aside, Maine is totally worth it. We hiked over several bald peaks like this one called Bobpate Mountain, just like in these grassy meadows, and there were all sorts of bogs, and it was just like such a treat at the end of our hike. In fact, the hardest mile of the entire Appalachian Trail is in Maine, and it's called Mahoosic Notch, and it's basically this gorge with boulders the size of SUVs that you have to pick your way over, around, under, and through. And so I took off my pack several times to squeeze through these little tiny openings. It took us well over 2 hours to get through the 1-mile section. So at this point, freshman move-in was getting closer and closer. So our journey did end in a small town called Rangeley, Maine, where we had kind of our last hurrah, and Mr. Berry found this nice moose statue to pose with. So at the end of our trip, we spent a day in Acadia National Park before we flew home in 2 hours, the same distance that had taken us weeks to hike. So I came home, I would say, a very, very different woman as the one that I left as, just because hiking the Appalachian Trail will teach you, and the trail definitely taught me, I'd say more than anything, I learned the full definition of the word perseverance and how to walk with blisters, like both literal and figurative. I learned not to take myself too seriously, to wash my socks and underwear in the Dunkin' Donuts bathroom, and how to meet and appreciate every person that I meet for what they are. I mean, they're human. Then also, I learned a lot just about the importance of knowing exactly why you're walking and why you're living, because if you don't, hiking can be miserable sometimes, but if you know why you're walking, then it's completely worth it. But what about you? What can a first-year student's story about a wacky summer adventure do to change how we live tomorrow? So to close, I'd like to share what I would call the 3 maxims of the Appalachian Trail. And this is like hiker code. I mean, everybody knows it, and the trail is what it is because everyone lives by them. So the first maxim is to leave no trace. And this is absolutely essential when you have thousands of human beings traveling on a 3-foot wide footpath. On the surface, this means to do your brother a favor and bury your human waste at least 6 inches. Pack in your trash, pack it out, camp where you ought to, and leave the rest of the forest floor alone. To take only pictures and leave only footprints. To leave no trace is essentially to leave your campsite better than you found it. This idea works like a charm, so long as everyone abides by it. When the entire AT community sets out to protect what's ours, the trail, then it stays beautiful. But we can all imagine what it's like to be hiking one morning and run across an instance of one person choosing to leave a trace. P.U. Morning ruined. Need I say more? So I challenge all of us to take responsibility for our actions in friendships, in service, in school, in life. So let's commit together to collectively leave our campsite, our Vanderbilt, and our society better than we found it. The second trail maxim is to hike your own hike. Every person comes to the trail with a different story, a different name, a different reason for walking, and a different set of shoes. At Vanderbilt, we compare GPAs instead of tenths, but it's no different. It's hiker code to allow each person to be fully who they are and nothing that they're not. And sometimes hikers would forget this, and we would start bickering over the dumbest things, like which hotel to stay in town and who has the fanciest headlamp. But all it took was one person speaking up and reminding everyone, like, hey, hike your own hike, to solve the issue. So I challenge us to respect each other and our uniqueness and celebrate it. After all, no matter what kind of background you have or what kind of boots you wear, each person still had to walk every step of the way to Maine. No one else can hike or live for you, so hike your own hike. The final trail maxim I want to share tonight is perhaps the hardest for me to grasp, for my heart and my mind to grasp. The journey is the destination. This might sound counterintuitive, and I suppose it is, but I've learned through experience. Confession, the original plan for last summer was actually to hike a little over 600 miles rather than 400. However, we didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into with the trail conditions in New England and how much that would slow us down compared to what we were used to in East Tennessee. So technically, we didn't reach the destination. I score almost 30 out of 30 on the J scale, which means I'm very type A, so this was a little hard to stomach. But reflecting back, I couldn't be more thankful, because instead of my memories from last summer being fixated on some picture that I got on top of Mount Katahdin, our original goal, they're instead focused on all the days we spent not making it there. And that's where the learning happened. Thus, I challenge all of us in our Vanderbilt culture of what's next, what about med school, what about my job or my internship, and what about next semester? Not to forget our goals, but also to embrace and reflect on the journey to them. The late nights studying in the common room together, and madcap adventures on Nashville public transportation. Because when it's all said and done, that's the destination. Thank you, and happy trails.